Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Strange and Unusual. This one is all about Greece's 2004 Olympics, which cost them possibly $11 billion. It's a bit of a mistake, so let's jump into it. Greece held the first ever Olympics in 1724 and the first model Olympics in 1896. Given their rich history in the international games, the Summer Olympics of 2004 were seen as an opportunity for Greece to restore the game's historical values. More importantly, it was a chance for Greece to show itself on a global stage. While the games themselves were a success, the financial situation was not. The financial situation was absolutely dreadful. The event went drastically over budget, but this has been the case at literally every modern Olympic. So, what made Greece quite so different? The financial crisis of 2008 pushed Greece into a dramatic economic recession, arguably the worst in Europe. As the country became a punching bag for world leaders and newspapers, some experts pointed to the 2004 Games as being a bit of a tipping point for the Greek economy. That year's Olympiad has since been hailed as one of the worst failures in Olympic history. The $11 billion price tag became the scapegoat for Greece's future financial difficulties. But the truth, it's a lot more complicated than that. Athens has struggled with the same problems that faced so many Olympic hosts. Today, the city is home to a handful of former Olympic venues that have since become dilapidated or expensive to maintain. Yet economists now point out that fiscal deficit of the games, likely around a few $1 billion, is about 1% of Greece's debt. In fact, infrastructure investments from the games may have benefited the Greek capital and limited the consequences of the recession. So, were the 2004 Athens Games actually an $11 billion mistake? Following the 1896 Olympics, Athens went a century without hosting the Games. As the 96 Olympics approached, Greece made a bid to hold the centennial celebration of the Games in the city where it all started. This proposal came in 1990, and it was thoroughly rejected by the International Olympic Committee. But the Greek community didn't give up. Over the following years, they did their best to address concerns that came up in the earlier bid, mostly surrounding corruption, pollution, and infrastructure. Athens hosted the 97 World Championships in athletics, which was a huge success. Though much smaller in scale, this boded well for the city. Later that year, Athens was selected to host the 2004 Summer Olympic Games. They won the bid because of the city's history. The IOC felt that the public's perception of the Olympics was veering away from the traditional values of sportsmanship and international cooperation, so Athens was selected as a means of bringing back that tradition. But the IOC also chose hosts based on their ambitions, hoping that grand displays attract more viewers and increase profits. The Greek committee made sure to accommodate, revealing an enthusiastic plan to prepare their infrastructure for hosting duties. The Summer Olympics would include competitions in 28 sports, from basketball and badminton to taekwondo and table tennis. Within these 28 sports were 30 medal events. Each event included a series of rounds before the medal events. More than 10,000 athletes from more than 200 countries would compete. The wide variety of sports called for a plethora of new venues, 31 in total. The influx of athletes required high-quality housing near the arenas and stadiums. New roads and train stations would be necessary to transport participants, officials, and press. The expanding media corps would need a massive headquarters to meet the increased demands for round-the-clock coverage. Most importantly, the influx of people would require an entirely new airport. This would be an enormous undertaking for just 7 years. But the Greeks convinced the IOC that they could achieve such a feat. And with the world watching, preparations began. The Athens 2004 Organizing Committee set the project's budget at $3 billion. If that seems unreasonably low for such an undertaking, well, that's because it absolutely is. As is tradition with the Olympics, the budget only includes projects directly related to the Games. In other words, the new airport, rail lines, and roads wouldn't count for the final cost. And I'll tell you something, airports ain't cheap. As such, work on a new airport began before the IOC chose Greece to host, perhaps to signal the seriousness of the Greek committee's intent. The brand new Athens International Airport was finished well ahead of the Games in 2001. With 8 kilometers of runway to serve the upcoming influx, the project cost more than $2 billion on its own. While its early completion seemed to indicate that all was going well, the rest of the preparations, well, they wouldn't go so smoothly. At the start of 2004, with the Olympics scheduled to begin in August, vast portions of the project were drastically behind schedule. This included work on several key venues, including the main stadium, which would host the opening ceremony. A tram line to connect stadiums to the Olympic Village was also drastically behind schedule. With the progress in Athens being reported on news worldwide, criticism quickly flowed in. Many sources questioned whether the games would begin at the scheduled time. What was abandoned? The main Olympic stadium was completed 2 months before the opening ceremony, as was the tram line. The final touches were put on several of the arenas in August, mere days before the Olympics were set to open. Not only did the games begin on time, though, but the opening ceremony was widely praised. It was held in the Olympic Stadium, designed by a Spanish architect, I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name, who had his hands in several key projects. The stadium's defining feature were a retractable glass roof and 2 massive arches. Final questions in the years leading up to the Olympics, as early as 2002, Western media began questioning whether Athens was a safe enough city to host the games. The criticism was extreme at times, with one news report claiming that the only place worse than Athens to hold the Olympics was Baghdad. That's a little harsh. The report seemed to spook a handful of countries, particularly the US and the UK. So the 2 countries demanded that the Greek government spared no cost in providing additional security to ward off terrorist attacks. The price to meet these demands was over $1.2 billion. This security cost, combined with event administration and essential infrastructure, brought the total cost of the Olympics to $8.5 billion. Keep in mind this does not include public infrastructure, especially for transportation. Considering all of that, the initial budget of $3 billion had been absolutely shattered. Unlike that glass ceiling that they didn't build on the Aquatic Center, as the Olympics came to a close a couple of weeks later, they were hailed as a huge success. Participants and spectators remained safe throughout. Greece had its best Olympic tally ever, and everything ran smoothly, including the fancy new tram system. In the immediate aftermath of the Olympics, all seemed well in Greece, and things did go well for a few years. Then it all changed. For several years after the Olympics, Greece basked in the glory of its success. Sure, ticket sales, though promising initially, were down dramatically from 6.5 million at the 2000 Sydney Olympics to 3.5 million in Athens. During 2004, tourism declined from 13.9 to 13.3 million annual visitors. However, the games were a success, and the new airport and rail system proved essential to the local economy. In fact, by 2007, Greek tourism was at an all-time high of 16 million, thanks in no small part to the Olympic-inspired publicity and infrastructure upgrades. However, with the global financial crisis of 2008, that came to an end. Of all the countries hit hard by the crisis, Greece was among the worst. By 2009, government debt reached $300 billion. Though a relatively small number compared to countries like the US, this figure dwarfed the size of Greece's economy, putting them in dire financial straits. At this time, reports began to surface about the financial impact of the Olympics. No matter how many pundits called them a success, Athens suffered from an ailment that plagues many Olympic hosts. The city was now filled with decrepit, unused sporting stadiums. By 2010, more than half of the 31 venues were reportedly in disrepair. These facilities included a baseball stadium, a humongous kayak course, and facilities built for less popular sports like table tennis, field hockey, and judo. As troubling as it was to see the structures decay, the alternative was hardly better. The facilities that survived required extravagant costs just to maintain them. This conundrum, common among Olympic and World Cup hosts, is called the white elephant problem. A white elephant is something too valuable to be disposed of, but too expensive to justifiably maintain. The Athens Committee had a plan to avoid this outcome, but the financial crisis foiled that strategy. The original plan was simple. Arenas for popular sports would continue to be utilized for the original purpose. Other venues, like the one for kayaking, would be purchased by the government or private equity firms, then repurposed into a space with more utility. The kayaking course would be converted into a water park, for instance. However, given the scale of the debt crisis, there was just no longer enough liquid capital floating around for anyone to make these necessary purchases. And the buildings just fell into disrepair. With these massive reminders of the cost of the Olympics, the Games quickly became a scapegoat. not just within the country, but worldwide. Publications like the Wall Street Journal asked, can Greece blame its financial crisis on the Olympics? Before long, this narrative spread like a wildfire. Of course, it's demonstrably false. Remember, the total cost of the Olympics was $11 billion. Revenue from broadcasting rights and ticket sales totaled $2 billion. About $3.5 billion was covered in a gradual tax from the previous years, leaving about $5 to $6 billion in unrecovered costs. While this certainly isn't chump change by any means, it was still a drop in the ocean of Greece's debt. Even as economists pointed out that the crisis couldn't be blamed on the Olympics, the argument changed. If it didn't cause the crisis, the Olympics symbolized the same issues that the Greek government struggled with for years. In the words of one paper, the 2004 Olympics were a microcosm of Greek economic dysfunction, missed budget estimates, poor planning, and financial mismanagement. Despite the pushback, the legacy seemed set in stone. The Olympics were a massive mistake, and an expensive one at that. With each successive Olympiad, the Greeks were lambasted and paraded as an example of what not to do. However, with more years of hindsight, a more nuanced truth has come to light. Following the photos of some of Greece's abandoned stadiums, it seemed that the verdict was in. Yet while some infrastructure has become unnecessary, much of it is still in use today, including the largest stadiums and venues. The Olympic Stadium complex, the largest of all the buildings, became the home for 2 football clubs. It's hosted countless concert and athletic events, including the 2007 Champions League final. The basketball stadium was also turned over to Athens' best basketball team. The Velodrome, Aquatic Center, Tennis Center, and other stadiums are still in use for their original purpose, hosting professional teams or private sports clubs. Even the International Media Center remains in use today, having been converted into a fully fledged mall. Other venues have become convention centers, and one building was converted into the headquarters for the Greek Ministry of Health. The Olympic Village became public housing, now home to thousands of Greek citizens. So while some stadiums have fallen in disrepair, there is no question that much of the construction is still being put to good use. If not for the Greek financial crisis, then the unused buildings would likely have been fully converted, and the Olympics would be a landmark success for Greece. Yet the country has found it difficult to shed this reputation. And perhaps that's for a good reason. Compared to Summer Olympics after 2004, Greece managed to keep expenses reasonably low. The cost per event in Athens was $9.8 million. Compare that to $14.9 million for Rio in 2016, $22.5 million for Beijing in 2008, and a whopping $49.5 million for London in 2012. By all accounts, the Athens Olympics were among the best-run games of this century. They were just unfortunately held in a country that was already on shaky financial grounds. And that's why, in the end, it seems that they might have been a mistake. Thankfully for Greece, a series of much more colossal failures have ended the conversation around Athens 2004. The Olympics in London, Rio, and Sochi are the newest examples of just how hard it is to host a successful Olympiad. Today, the IOC is changing the way that hosts are chosen. Instead of selecting ambitious plans in developing countries, the committee is beginning to favor cities that already have the infrastructure. They're considering allowing whole regions to host games and taking a friendlier view towards repeat hosts. Perhaps before too long, Athens could indeed host again. So, I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe.